Welcome to Early Adopter, the podcast where we help make AI your unfair advantage. I'm Jess, a marketing exec, chief jargon buster, and I help ground AI in your practical day-to-day.
And I'm Kyle. I live at the intersection of data, product, and strategy, and I do my best to turn the technical AI chaos into something you can actually use.
We go beyond the overhyped headlines and give you the unvarnished truth about AI, what's real, what's hype, and what actually matters for your business.
Every week, we simplify the complex, spotlight the risks, and give you practical tools to make smarter decisions as the landscape rapidly shifts around us.
From agents to commerce to prompt engineering and vibe coding, we deliver honest insights, actionable strategies, and zero gatekeeping.
Let's dive in.
This is Early Adopter. Welcome back to Early Adopter, the podcast where we help make AI your unfair advantage. I'm Jess.
And I'm Kyle. So Jess, how's your week been? How you feeling?
Well, I was just saying to you before the pod started, I have a cough of death. So if I have to stop and mute myself for a minute, it's that is the reason why. So I definitely feel better than I did last weekend. I actually don't know how I recorded last weekend because I felt rough.
Yeah.
So more power to me for pushing through. But it's the worst cold I've had in quite a while. So
yeah.
Thanks
well,
to
the problem is
whoever
it
gave it
sounds
to me.
like it's kind of gotten into your lungs, which also
Yeah,
doing the
exactly.
podcast
Well,
a little tough.
it definitely started in my lungs as well. Like that was like the first thing I noticed was like that sore throat that feels like it's traveling down into your lungs. So I'll be fine. I mean, I'm definitely better than I was even earlier this week, even 2 days ago. So it's every day is a little bit better. I'm just over it. Anyway,
Dedication to the pod. I love it.
Yeah, dedication to the pod. I have a friend visiting this weekend as well, so hopefully I'll be able to have a nice. Well, I think I'll be okay, but I'll have hopefully a more interesting weekend than I've had for the last couple of days.
Yeah, pop some paracetamol and get some rest. Prepare.
Exactly. How as
you cough.
As I pause to cough. Anyway, how was your week?
Good. Just obviously I'm back in my normal.
No longer
enclave.
Battling the sounds of birds.
Yeah, no longer battling that. Although, I mean, kudos to Apple AirPods.
I know.
It cut out so much of that, which was great. Let's see what else. No, just getting back into the swing of things. Happy to be back home. I will tell you one little thing. I don't know if this is TMI, so we can cut this if it is.
Okay.
But I got sunburn. And so now, it's just been so itchy and I'm starting to peel. So sad.
That's the most annoying thing. I had that once where I got really sunburnt on my shoulders and I had to wear the same top for about 3 days in a row because it was like a top with a weird cutout pattern or something and everything else was just too painful to wear.
Yeah. Yeah. So. Well, this was just kind of a little bit of oversight when if you're going to go surf in the Costa Rican sun for more than 2 or 3 hours, you should definitely put on multiple. You should reapply. 100%.
Yeah. Well, that's fair. I mean, look, it happens to the best of us. Even when you are being very on top of the sunscreen, it happens. So, well, right. So this week, we are going to talk about one of the trendiest topics of the moment. It's something that we've talked about a little bit in terms of our news stories, but it's not something that we've covered properly yet. And that is OpenClaw. And specifically... I know, and I feel like it kind of needs dramatic music because specifically today we're going to be looking at how to use it without accidentally handing it the keys to your entire digital life. And I think before we dive in, I wanted to flag something. Today's episode is going to be a tiny bit more technical than our usual ones. This topic is really something that can't be done justice without getting into some of the mechanics of how it works. So we're going to try really hard to make sure that everything we say is our usual jargon-free style, but there are some things that we just can't avoid with this particular one, and it's quite important to talk about this one, I think.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it come up so many conversations and I get so many Medium articles about it, but I was just thinking in my head, I was playing the How to Be a Millionaire music, where they the lights go down.
The lights,
that was anyway, I think that is the goal for today. This is a technical episode, or at least in order to be successful with this, you kind of have to get into some of the technical details to protect yourself. And so I think the complexity of this overall is one of the more important things to understand about OpenClaw. It's obviously a very powerful tool. Reading into the headlines and also in our little use cases, obviously there's a lot that you can do with it, but it is very risky. And so there are ways to protect yourself. But at the same time, you're just going to have to accept some of the risks if you decide to actually go down this path.
So I have my jargon buzzer ready to go for this episode. And if you've been listening to us over the last couple of weeks, this is something that we've talked about quite a few times, whether it's because of that Molt book saga, which is something that we've covered in a previous episode, which was the social media network for agents that made all the headlines a couple of weeks ago. It's also, something that's coming up a lot on LinkedIn at the minute. I'm sure that people have come across it on LinkedIn. So there's a lot of noise about it. So today we're really aiming to cut through all of that.
The Molt book thing in particular, which was, again, to remind everyone, was AI agents forming their own social network. And in the most egregious case, there was apparently starting their own religions overnight. Made for great headlines, but underneath it was a pretty serious security disaster. And we'll touch on that a little bit today, as well as I think some of the Molt book drama was actually hype and not technically agents creating their own religion or anything like that.
No, it was actually, it was people behind the agents.
Yeah. But the whole Molt book aspect is kind of a big component of how we think about OpenClaw's overall risk.
Yeah. So today we'll be looking at what OpenClaw actually is, how it's different from tools like Cloud Cowork that some of our listeners are already using. We covered it a couple of weeks ago. We've got some real business use cases. We've got the pros and the cons. And yes, the technical complexity is definitely a con in this particular instance. And then we'll get into the practical side of how to use it safely if you choose to use it.
All right. So let's get into it. So we'll start from the beginning. OpenClaw, what is it even? So it launched in November 2025, which is pretty recently here. And it's an open source autonomous AI agent that runs locally on your own computer. I want to point to two things in that description. One is autonomous and two runs locally. Both of those are very significant and important to understand kind of the nuance there. So we'll unpack that.
And it's had a pretty chaotic journey in general, but also just to arrive on this name, it was originally called Clawdbot, spelled CLAWD bot, like a claw, which understandably is a little too close to Anthropic's Claude tool. So the developer, who's an Austrian guy called Peter Steinberger, renamed it Moltbot, which then attracted a wave of impersonation scams from cybercriminals who were pretending to be the official project. So it's gotten a little messy before it finally landed on what it is now, which is OpenClaw. But I think that also adds to a little bit of the confusion around it because it has changed quite a bit in the last couple of weeks, even not even months.
Yeah. And so I've heard those different names all talked about as if they were different examples of this, but turns out it's all the same.
Yeah, exactly.
But it does represent kind of a little bit of a chaotic start. In a short period of time, it had a trademark issue, a rebrand, and then has had a lot of fraudulent problems, not to mention a lot of the AI gone wrong via security.
Yeah.
So it's definitely been on a bit of a speed run, but it has landed on OpenClaw, and that is kind of the brand that we'll be talking about. And I'll just point out it's getting a lot of traction very quickly. It has amassed over 160,000 stars or reviews on GitHub since launch. So it is being used substantially, but also the fact that it's getting a lot of traction on GitHub tells you about who it speaks to, which is more of a developer community.
I was going to say, do you want to clarify what GitHub is? But I think that's right. It's a developer platform.
Yeah, it technically is a repository to handle your code base, but obviously very popular with developers.
Yeah. And then there is a big development that happened recently with OpenClaw and OpenAI, which I think we want to come back to because it's really relevant about how you think about the future of this tool. But basically, Peter Steinberger, the developer who came up with OpenClaw, has now started to work at OpenAI. It was kind of an acquihire, is that what it is? Where they didn't really buy OpenClaw itself, but they paid him to come work for them, which essentially is the same thing.
Yeah, and I think we'll maybe talk about this, or just really quickly, it tells you where OpenAI is trying to go in terms of being more autonomous or task forward. So anyway, but to go back to this, so if you think about all the AI tools you use, whether that's ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, Perplexity, take your pick, they essentially live in a browser or a desktop app. You go to them, you type something and they respond. You have to go back to them and then you carry the task out yourself, or you copy paste, you go do something. That's changing a little bit with Claude Code, but generalizing, you get responses back. They tell you what to do. They don't do it themselves.
And that is where OpenClaw is very different because it completely flips that. So it doesn't
Mhm.
just give you the answers, it takes action. So it can open your email, it can read your calendar, it can browse the internet, it can manage files on your computer, it can run commands, it connects to existing tools like WhatsApp or Slack or Discord or Telegram. So it wouldn't just write an email for you or suggest what the email
Mhm.
should say, it will actually send the email for you. And that's the really key difference.
Yeah, there's a great analogy happening in, AI security circles right now, which it's kind of, if we start to break it down like a person, AI today has just been the brain, right? You
Mhm.
talk to it, it responds. What now OpenClaw is it starts to be AI with hands. So it can actually reach out and do stuff. So it's not just AI that advises, it's AI that reaches out and does things in the world, which is an incredible capability and starts to hit on the promise of what AI can do for a lot of people. But it's also the reason that the security conversation is so important, because it is starting to, and somewhat autonomously, reach out to the world and do things for you.
Right. So let's talk about their skills system because it's central to how OpenClaw works and it's also one of the biggest risk factors. So
Mhm.
OpenClaw comes with core functionality out of the box, but you can extend it by downloading what they call skills, which are essentially pre-built instruction sets that tell it how to do something specific.
Mhm.
So if you want it to manage your fitness app, you can download a fitness skill. Or if you want it to monitor your calendar and auto schedule reminders, there is a skill for that. So these come from a community marketplace called Claw Hub.
Mhm. And if anyone is in the process of, like, while they're listening to this episode, downloading OpenClaw and is like, oh, let me go check out the skills, please stop. We will get to the risk sections, but do not download anything yet. Just hold your horses. Or if you're going to turn this off in 5 seconds, just be aware, do a lot of research on that first before you
Yeah.
do anything.
We'll
Okay,
we'll
sorry.
we'll get into that.
We'll get a little bit. I just want to give that disclaimer in case someone drops off or they're downloading in the
No,
process, like,
it's
stop.
a good disclaimer. So
Yeah.
it's essentially like the App Store, but for your
Mhm.
AI agent's capabilities, except the App Store, which if you've ever tried to get an app into the App Store, you know this. The App Store has a very robust review process, which can take
Mhm.
ages, which is a pain in the ass in itself. There's good reason for it. Let's put it that way. ClawHub does not have that robust review process, which is something that we'll come back to in the risks section. Here's something that might, make your jaw drop because it certainly did mine. OpenClaw doesn't just use pre-built skills. It can write its own new skills on the fly. So you can ask it to do something it's never done before and it will figure out how and create that capability
Mhm.
in real time.
So, where this is interesting is it's not just following scripts, it's writing new scripts for itself. And these can be autonomous, adaptive based on the data or context it gets, but also really importantly to understand why it's great, but also has a huge risk is it's deeply wired into your local computer and into your systems. You can also integrate it with a lot of the tools like Slack and stuff like that, which again is very deeply wired into your day to day.
Yeah. And again, as a reminder, just before we move on, Peter Steinberger, the developer, just joined OpenAI. So I think this is really just an indication of where OpenAI are thinking in general. It's probably a good indicator of where their brains are heading.
Yeah, and it's worth being clear on this is an acqui-hire. So
Yeah.
OpenClaw is going to stay open source and live in basically like a nonprofit foundation that OpenAI will support. But I'm sure there's a lot of economic benefits to Steinberger joining OpenAI and working with inside the largest AI company.
Especially for him.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
Mhm.
so let's talk about how OpenClaw compares to Claude Cowork, because even just talking about it just now, it sounds like there's a lot of overlap. Cowork is obviously something that we've been talking about a lot in the last couple of weeks. It's something that our listeners have been using or exploring. So are these things the same thing? Is Cowork the same as OpenClaw?
So they're both in the agentic AI category, meaning they take actions on your behalf in a somewhat autonomous fashion rather than just having a chat. So just where you're conversing back and forth. But there are pretty major differences in how they do that. So Claude Cowork is built by Anthropic, which is a major AI company, has commercial support, security teams, legal accountability, and obviously is for profit. OpenClaw is open source, totally free, community built, highly customizable, self-hosted, but also maybe much scrappier.
I'm gonna buzz the jargon buzzer. When you say self-hosted, what do you mean by that?
Self-hosted means you like download it on your computer or you download it onto your own server and run it uh, locally or within your own confines. So I'm not reaching out to like the internet and then it's sending me back responses or doing things, or that's how a Cloud Cowork is effectively working. It does sit locally on your computer, but Anthropic is a cloud-based system and its LLMs are hosted in the cloud.
Yeah.
Hopefully I'm not hitting my jargon on that one.
No. So essentially OpenClaw lives on your machine and you are responsible for all your security. That is very, very,
Yes.
very important. There's no company like Anthropic standing behind you. You are the security team. So
Yeah.
let's just
And
reiterate that.
effectively, if something goes wrong, it's on you. There's no
Exactly.
company there to help you as an incident response team to pinpoint it. You are the security team. That's very important to
Yes.
recognize.
Yeah. So it's definitely more powerful and more flexible and potentially cheaper than Cowork, but it is also considerably more exposed. There's also a pretty major philosophical difference as well. Claude Cowork uses Anthropic's hosted AI, and then again, as you just said, it runs through all of their existing infrastructure. OpenClaw lets you plug in any AI model you want, which is actually very interesting. So you could use OpenAI, Gemini, or even completely local models that never leave your device. So if privacy is a big priority for your business, this local model option is a real differentiator. But I will say it's also something that is available with Mistral, like we talked about the other day. So it is not your only option if self-hosted or privacy is a big concern for you.
Yeah, and that's why a lot of privacy conscious developers or operators are interested in this. If you're, there's a lot of different use cases, but let's say, I'm not sure if this is the right one, but let's say potentially you were a lawyer and you were handling sensitive client matters. Or we brought up financial services firms that are worried about regulation, healthcare, et cetera. The idea of AI that does agentic work, but that the data never leaves your server, that's a very compelling narrative or a different category of solution that's helpful.
In theory, in theory. In
In theory.
practice, getting it to actually be that secure is where the complexity lives. We'll come on to that in a minute.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm not sure that this is the right use case. So again, I will just stop you before you start downloading and putting all of your sensitive healthcare, financial services, or legal data into OpenClaw.
Yeah, exactly. Please don't do that. Okay, so use cases. And I want to say up front that everything that we're about to talk about is really exciting. And there are reasons why people are getting very excited about this tool. But please continue to listen to the episode. Do not stop after you hear this and say, oh my God, this is so cool. I'm going to go away and do this right now. Because the cons and the security conversation that comes later on in this episode is so important. It's the thing that determines whether any of this is actually safe for you to implement. So file all of this under compelling vision, but proceed with caution.
Could not agree more. I know we've talked about this over the week. You know, it's like, oh gosh, there's a real conversation whether or not I'm going to keep OpenClaw on my laptop or not.
Well, we'll get into that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, what I think is a really compelling component of OpenClaw is the channel integrations. So every other AI tool requires you to kind of go to it. OpenClaw effectively, once you download it, it's coming to you. It's running in the background constantly. So you can start a conversation on WhatsApp, pick it up on your laptop, go continue it in on Telegram. So it exists in all the different places where you live. So it has really strong integrations to the platforms that you're kind of working through day to day. It follows you across the platforms, and it has persistent memory as it does it. What that means is that it knows your history, it knows the conversations you're having, and it knows the interactions that it has had with other tools. So it doesn't just respond; it's really kind of living and breathing across the things that you're working on, and then makes actions based on that.
Yeah. And for a lot of business owners who are our audience, and also especially for anyone living outside the US, WhatsApp is basically how you run your life. Like so much stuff, I almost exclusively
Yeah.
talk to people in WhatsApp.
Mhm.
The idea that your AI assistant could live right there in WhatsApp or in the same app where you're texting your clients or your family, like over here in the UK, I talk to work people on WhatsApp all the time. That it's a very natural extension, and the ability for it to then go do actions on your behalf. Like, I don't know, I make an arrangement for a coffee on WhatsApp, it can go put that in my calendar. Like, that is
Mhm.
very appealing. That's a level of friction removal that nothing else has
Mhm.
really managed yet. So I can
Yeah.
definitely see why the integrations is a big driver for this.
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of use cases around this. And there's a specific setup that I keep coming back to that I think is really powerful. You can run like again, you're gonna put OpenClaw on a server, which can be super cheap, $5, $10 a month. And then through WhatsApp, you can handle calendar, notes, track your habits, browse the web, transcribe voice memos, work on meeting transcripts. So I've seen this calculated where it replaces a lot of different tools like Notion, Todoist, habit tracking apps. You could even argue it replaces a lot more expensive apps. But as a result, there's a significant cost savings that you can have
Yeah.
against all the SaaS tools that you've signed up for versus this one thing that does kind of everything and remembers you across all of the different interactions. So it's pretty powerful.
Yeah, there's actually even a name for it. It's called the SaaSpocalypse, which is the idea that a well-configured agent starts collapsing your entire software stack into one system.
Hmm.
So that's getting rid of all of these millions of subscriptions that we all have for all these tools that you kind of maybe
Hmm.
sometimes use, sometimes don't use, all of that. And when you see it in that light, like that example that you were just talking about,
Hmm.
you get it. I get the appeal immediately.
Yeah. And obviously markets, like financial markets have responded.
Yeah.
There's been some pretty massive dips, I would say, over the last few weeks because I think people see the potential where this is going. But let me give some concrete examples that are useful when you start thinking about OpenClaw. So let me give you some concrete examples that I think can be relevant or how you think about OpenClaw. So, if you are a solo consultant, for example, you are probably doing outreach on LinkedIn, but maybe it's been a little quiet. Your website is supposed to be a living, breathing document, but it can be very difficult to keep updated. So, it might be a little out of date. You've got lots of case studies with clients that you've worked for sitting in your maybe Google Docs or your file storage system that you haven't really done much with, or maybe are a little outdated or not quite relevant to what you're currently doing. What the trap you can get into as a solo consultant, and Jess, we can kind of speak from experience here,
Sure
is
can.
yeah, you're kind of so focused on delivering, right, that you're not really doing a lot of the marketing in the background, and you probably think to yourself, oh, I should hire a marketing agency, I should hire an admin that would help me with this. Effectively, OpenClaw can handle a lot of that marketing and the distribution. It can help keep your socials active. It can draft follow-ups for leads that have gone cold. It can take those documents that are sitting inside your Google Drive or your storage repository and be pulling them out, updating them, and then sending them out if you give them access to that. It can send you a daily brief on what needs your attention based on the conversations it's seen across WhatsApp and Slack and email. So you can effectively install OpenClaw and have it do all of the marketing and distribution elements that you've never really done because you're so busy with your clients.
So another use case that I saw was an automated client onboarding use case, which is really interesting. So as an example, a new client signs on, a project folder is created, a welcome email goes out, a kickoff call gets scheduled, follow-up reminders land in a task manager, and all of that can be triggered by one WhatsApp message. So as someone who spends a lot of time building workflows, I'm working on one right now where I could totally see how this could be brilliant for it, but
Mhm.
it's just not quite there yet. So this idea of being fully automated is amazing and it could save so much time. But again,
Mhm.
there's concerns.
This one I think is wild. And again, I take it with a grain of salt because it is the internet and it
Yeah.
could just be for hype. But there's a documented case, or at least someone wrote an article of someone giving their OpenClaw agent $1,000 and going to sleep. They didn't give it a prompt, they didn't give it a budget, or really, they only gave it an objective: build something that makes money. And by morning, so let's call it 8, 10 hours later, it had researched a market, built an information product, launched a sales page, and started marketing that across social channels. According to this article, it's generated over $60,000 in revenue. Again, take it with a grain of salt,
Yeah.
but I think at least you can look at the steps and you can see how it could do all of these things. So obviously very compelling.
Yeah. This is the thing, right? You can see the appeal of all of this. Like, that's the dream, that an agent goes away and does all the hard work for you. And it shows what autonomous actually means in practice. So it's not just this idea of like going back and forth with a chatbot. It's the software that actually executes end to end without you having to do anything. And that is very interesting.
And for teams, it can get really powerful, right? So you could wake up to basically discovery calls or demo calls already booked in your calendar because it followed up on leads. It coordinated times. Separately, you can have like campaigns running to build out your pipeline. It can qualify those leads just like a sales admin might. It can work as a shared agent across a whole company with different access levels per role. Again, I'll caveat that's going to take a bit of setup and security. So it's not just something you spin up. But for small organizations where, you have people wearing multiple hats and one person can do a lot of different roles and maybe be everyone's admin, this can be a really transformative like productivity upgrade for those small organizations. And all of this sounds incredible. And the thing is, it really is. I mean, it's impressive. These were all real use cases that we found. I've been testing this out over the last week. Again, it's unclear. We'll get to whether or not I will keep it on my computer. I will find a different alternative that I feel is a little bit more secure. But already, some of this stuff starts to feel like magic because it has that piece where it's starting to actually do things out in the real world without you. And that feels pretty incredible, right?
Yeah. Okay, so the big caveat, right? None of this is safe to dive into without understanding what you're handing over.
Yeah, so we'll talk about some of the upsides before we get into the risks, apart from the use cases that we've just been talking about, because those pros are pretty compelling as well.
Yeah. So first of all, it runs locally. Like we said, the data doesn't pass through a third-party cloud server. So for anyone who is handling sensitive client information or anyone who's just a little more kind of wary of their data living on someone else's servers, that's a big advantage.
Absolutely. Second, model flexibility. You're not locked into a particular LLM. So you can have it work with OpenAI, Gemini, Claude, or Mistral, as we've talked about, or other open source models that you're hosting yourself. So that's pretty cool. You could also have that model be completely offline on your own local computer, like a small language model, which we've talked about in the past. So as the AI landscape is evolving and new models are coming out every day with different benefits, you're not stuck into any one thing. You can kind of like drop in a new model depending on what's the latest and most exciting one.
The next pro is the cost. It's open source and it's free to run. So once it's set up, your main costs are really just the API access to whatever AI model you're using, which is generally pretty low. So if you stack that against what you might be paying for, 5 or 6 different SaaS tools, that math is pretty compelling.
Fourth, and this is a really important one, it actually does things, as we've talked about. It goes out into the world, right? It's not, here's a template you could send. It actually can send the thing. We'll get into whether or not that's a good idea or not. But also, it's not, here's what your day looks like, right? It sends you a brief before you wake up and basically triggers that without you needing to trigger it. That's very different from any of the AI assistants that we've used before or any of the models that you're probably logging into and using daily.
And finally, there is a very strong community around OpenClaw. I mean, obviously, we talked about the 160,000 stars on GitHub. That means that there's a really active ecosystem that are they're building skills, they're sharing configurations, they're troubleshooting problems. So that is a real infrastructure, even if it's not an actual company behind it. Whether or not that's enough to address some of the concerns, that's a separate question. But there is a very strong community around OpenClaw, which is a nice thing to have. Okay, so now let's talk about the cons, because we keep alluding to these. I want to be really direct here because we're not going to sell you on this without being very honest about the risk picture with this. We were both a little nervous about talking about this topic because we actually don't want to encourage the use without really emphasizing the security risks. This is something that both of us, I mean, you can talk a little bit more about your actual experiences, but I have flat out refused to use it. And I've had people asking me if I've used it yet. And my response has been absolutely not. I'm not letting that anywhere near my systems. So this all sounds great. We keep talking about the pros, but we really need to get into the cons for this.
So the first and most fundamental con is that the security model is still being improvised. OpenClaw is moving very fast. The developer, who again now is at OpenAI, was building security practice on the fly and being very reactive to some of the horror stories that were coming out. So, if you think about this application, though, for something that has access to your email, your files, your messaging apps, effectively the ability to run commands at like a admin level, at like the command line. I know it's a jargon buzzer, but it basically means it has like full admin access to your
Yeah.
computer. Improvised security, especially something that was maybe vibe coded very quickly without security in mind. Again, vibe coding is not bad inherently, but the fact that security was not really a core design principle of this thing, it does not create a lot of confidence when it comes to this tool.
So one cybersecurity researcher that we came across while we were doing research for this described it as an overeager intern with an adventurous nature, a long memory, and no real understanding of what should stay private. That one really landed for me. It's very capable and it's very enthusiastic, but absolutely no judgment about what should stay off limits.
Yeah, this poor intern analogy, I mean,
I
it's just
know, I
getting
know,
beat
I
to
know.
death.
It's getting rinsed.
Yeah. Anyway, the second major con, and this is a really, really big one, is something called prompt injection. And we'll talk a little bit about this, like the setup process for how to protect against this, but it's really worth explaining carefully because it's not obvious. We think prompts, you hear prompt and you're like, oh, we were talking about like how we prompt things, but this is what it is. So when you ask OpenClaw to browse a website or read your emails or process a document, the content of those documents or that text can contain hidden instructions, something that you can't see with the naked eye, but is text that gives like an instruction to the AI that is doing that action. It can cause it to take specific actions disguised as normal content and potentially create like a tunnel directly into your laptop. So prompt injection is a really big security concern when using this.
Yeah. So, as an example, someone could send you an email with invisible text, which is literally just white text on a white background that you'd never see, that instructs your AI agent to forward all your emails to an external email address. And then your agent would go away and do that, and you would have absolutely no idea.
And researchers have already proven this works. So malicious websites can embed instructions that OpenClaw, will follow to the letter. Or, another example is you get a lot of spam email, right? Those spam emails, you could open them up, OpenClaw could read them, and there could be secret instructions in there to, open up a tunnel, download something, and that could potentially expose any of the data that's on your laptop. So one of the hardest problems in agentic AI right now is this prompt injection challenge, and it doesn't really have a clean solution yet. So there's not really a good answer to this right now, which is, I think, again, why we're saying this is a little risky.
Another big con is the skills marketplace. So we kind of alluded to this earlier, but this one actually has data behind it. There was a security company that did research into this that analyzed OpenClaw skills in the ClawHub marketplace and found that nearly 15% of them contained malicious instructions. So that's 1 in 7. And even as bad skills were removed, many quickly reappeared under new names. So it's like a whack-a-mole situation.
15% is a lot, but I'll also give you the absolute numbers. That's over 800 of those skills. So there's a massive skill library, and a massive amount of them are malicious, things that are doing prompt injection or reading, like tracking, key logging everything that you're doing. So it's a pretty massive problem. So you need to be really, really careful.
And so the next con is something that I really want to highlight for our audience. It's genuinely more technical than almost any other AI tool we've discussed on this show. Like, we pride ourselves on being jargon free, making things very not technical, but setting this up safely requires understanding things like Docker containers, virtual machines, network port configurations, SSH tunneling, allow lists, environment variables. These are not concepts that come with a YouTube tutorial that get you there in 20 minutes. If any of those things you didn't understand, you probably shouldn't be using OpenClaw. These are all things that we could jargon buzzer because they are all technical terms, and they're all things that you really need to understand if you were setting this up.
Yeah, and if you set OpenClaw up without understanding a lot of these things, because again, obviously you can spin this up very easily, very quickly, but if you set it up without having it, be a Docker container and having it be a really restricted one and et cetera, which is really easy to do because there are guides online that skip over the security steps and allow you to do just the really simple setup. You could expose your entire OpenClaw instance to the open internet and again, really open yourself up to a lot of the problems and things that we're talking about. So just to make you aware of the threat, there are people who are actively scanning for OpenClaw ports or OpenClaw ports. And some of those instances have been found with API keys or email contents, full chat histories just sitting in plain text accessible to anyone on the internet who found them.
So the Dutch Data Protection Authority, which is a government regulatory body in the Netherlands, has explicitly warned organizations not to deploy experimental agents like OpenClaw on systems that handle sensitive or regulated data. When regulators are specifically naming a tool, that's, a signal that maybe you need to be a little careful with this one.
And so there's also a newer threat category that's emerged from this. Info stealers, love that name, but it's malware or like a virus that steals data. They've started specifically targeting OpenClaw configurations or those OpenClaw ports. Traditional malware steals your passwords, but this new variant steals your entire AI identity. So all of that memory, the configuration, the context, the API keys that you've put in OpenClaw, it will steal all of that. So think about every chat that you have that OpenClaw is sitting on top of reading, it now can gain access to that. So researchers are calling it cognitive context theft. Say that 5 times fast. And it's genuinely new category of attack because, quite frankly, none of the tools that we've had in the past had access to this much data or were logging as much data as OpenClaw was. So it's really like stealing your entire soul identity. Sorry, maybe that's a little too aggressive, but it's taking a lot of information about you.
So in summary, security is still being figured out. Prompt injections are a real threat. The skills marketplace has a significant malware presence. It requires actual technical knowledge to set up safely, and misconfiguration can expose your entire digital life. So that is a pretty serious list of cons. For all that it sounds great, do those pros outweigh those cons?
And none of this means that you shouldn't use it. So that's not our stance necessarily. It means that you need to use it with your eyes open. You need to set this up carefully, maybe enlist someone who is a little more technical if that's not your thing to help you with this. But, we want you to be really aware of the potential risks. That's, I think, what we're here to talk about.
Okay, so let's get into the practical guidance on this. Kyle, let's try to make this accessible because some of these concepts, again, are very technical. And I want someone who doesn't know what a Docker container is to still be able to come away with actionable steps for this. So over to you.
That's a fair challenge. I will do my best. I think there's a fundamental rule that you could implement that would help solve some of these challenges, which is don't install OpenClaw on your main computer or the thing that you're using every day. That could potentially protect yourself. I love this. This is kind of my term. I like to call it the daily driver. So this is the laptop with your work files, your saved passwords, access to saved passwords around your financial documents, your connected accounts. Unless you're really, really strong about your security, I would not put OpenClaw on that machine, probably ever.
I saw a news article the other day about how sales in little personal computers, like little Macs, has absolutely skyrocketed in the last couple of weeks because of this, where people are just going out and buying a cheapy version that they can use.
The iMac Mini. People are going crazy
that's
for
what it is. It's the iMac. Yeah, exactly. You would not give your house keys, your car keys, and your wallet to a brand new employee on the first day. As always, you just give them access to what they need for the task in front of them, and then maybe give them access over time as they earn trust. So that's the mindset that you need to think about with OpenClaw.
Yeah. So practically speaking, ideally you want to run it on a spare device. An iMac Mini is a great example of this. And if you're technically inclined, you want to do it inside a Docker container. Again, that's a little technical, something you can download. There are guides to do that. So within the OpenClaw side, when you download it, they do have steps to how to install it inside that Docker container while it's running. It's essentially like a sandbox environment. That's kind of developer term for like your test environment. Call it a sandbox because you can go and play in it kind of safely. But it's an isolated environment where OpenClaw lives, But then you can build security configurations around that Docker container so OpenClaw can't spread beyond its walls. So if something goes wrong inside the sandbox, it stays inside the sandbox. It's not going out to like the rest of your house, to use that analogy.
And you actually set it up this way in a Docker container with the full works, right? Do you
Yeah.
want to tell us about your experience with that?
Yeah, it's called a hardened configuration. So if you're doing research online, you're like, okay, how do I set this up? You want to search for how to set up OpenClaw with a hardened Docker configuration. I went ahead and did that, and I want to flag something. I think a lot of people think use Docker and they think that's the whole answer. It's not. You really have to start to put a lot of guardrails around that. So there's a difference between running it just in Docker and running it in Docker correctly. I went through that specific hardened setup, really tried to close things off. And it's that configuration that really matters.
Do you want to give us the quick version of what that looks like?
Yes. And again, look, let's be frank. You can use AI to help you with a lot of the instructions around this, but make sure that you are checking off all of the boxes on this. So first bit as part of that configuration. So the OpenClaw ports, you want to bind to your local host only. Again, you may not know what that means, but maybe that's the point. So only your own machine can reach it. So never the open internet. You want to close this off from the open internet for those prompt injection reasons we talked about. You run the Docker container as a non-root user. So that's a non-admin user. So this has to do with its permissions. So it can't go in and change things directly within your laptop or your computer setup. Effectively, that limits the damage if something goes wrong. Create a read-only file system inside the container. So that way it can't change its own configurations, which, yes, people have talked about it actually doing. So you don't want to do that. And I think the one that people get wrong most often is you should not mount the Docker socket. So that's essentially giving the container like the keys to Docker itself, where it could spin up new containers, access other parts of your system. And effectively, that would create the whole sandbox to fall apart. Again, OpenClaw can work and change things and work autonomously. So if you don't close it off from its ability to do this, it will just see the objective and it will go change these things. That sounds like magic, but it's not really. It's just configuration, like settings and text.
So if you think of Docker as like a sealed room and the settings are the locks on the door inside it.
Exactly. And the thing is you don't want to turn the lock and then give the key to OpenClaw. Is probably the best thing, right? And the official documentation for OpenClaw actually says this, which I found honest, but still worrisome. There is no perfectly secure setup. So none of this is about perfection. It's just about making sure that if something goes wrong, it's contained, recoverable, and ultimately you're trying to limit your exposure as much as possible.
And I think something that's worth reiterating, which is something that you just mentioned, but let's mention it again, keep it off the public internet. OpenClaw has a specific port 18789 that it uses. By default, if that is exposed to the internet, anyone who scans for it can potentially connect to your agent. So the safe configuration is just to keep that locked down, keep it bound to localhost, which means only your machine can communicate with it.
And this is again technical, but it's done via something called SSH tunneling. Again, apologies for the technicalities, but that's what you're looking for in your instructions that would close this off. It's really important. I know it sounds intimidating, but it's something you should set up and potentially get some technical help with setting up if it doesn't really make sense.
Yeah, and I think that kind of brings us back to something that we said earlier, which is if you're listening to this and you're reading through these steps and thinking, I don't know what half of this means, that's a completely legitimate response. That's how I felt with some of this. This tool is not at a plug and play stage for non-technical users. Acknowledging that is not a failure. It's being realistic. And honestly, it's probably going to keep you and your machine safe.
Now, one thing I added that I'd recommend, this is not my genius, I found this, but you want to write guardrails directly into the agent itself. And I've talked about markdown files in the past. You can use a markdown file to kind of create those guardrails. The example that I found, they called it the soul markdown file, which felt a little
love that.
aggressive, but I think it's It actually is like relevant to the architecture, so you want to use that naming construct. But effectively, it's the agent's standing instructions. So things like never send an email without showing me the draft first and getting an explicit yes to send. Never delete anything without confirmation. These are the things that we talked about with Claude Cowork that
I
were
was going to
inherent in
say,
the system.
yeah.
These you have to configure yourself. It's in the agent's context from the start of every single task. And it should also answer that kind of AI gone wrong that we had last week, where the person from Meta, which I think we're going to get to, but I think it solves that problem.
Yeah, which is a good segue into the human approval point because this is the perfect time to talk about the AI gone wrong that we did a couple of weeks ago. As a reminder, Summer Yu, who is the head of AI safety and alignment at Meta, who is one of the most qualified people on the planet to be doing this, she ran OpenClaw on her inbox. She explicitly told it to confirm before taking any action, and it still deleted her entire
Mhm.
inbox.
Yeah. So what happened to her was that her inbox was so large, it triggered something called compaction. Again, somewhat of a technical term, but the agent had to compress its memory mid task. And in doing so, it lost that original instruction to ask for permission first. And so again, it wasn't like it ignored her or was acting kind of iRobot style,
Yeah.
like going bad, but it had just forgotten that instruction because it was no longer in the context when it compacted that memory.
And if it can happen to her, it can happen to anyone. So human approval for anything that cannot be
Mhm.
undone, write the guardrails into the soul markdown as the backup layer, but understand that together there's still a layer of protection. It's not a wall. Everything else that we've just talked about with the isolated environment, the minimal permissions, like all of that matters as well. None
Mhm.
of these safeguards work alone.
Couple other things I want to say. We talked about worrying about prompt injection. We talked about the skills marketplace to be really careful with what you look at. Those are all things that you need to do your own research and be careful about. The way to kind of track the system and potentially spot any errors is to keep logs. So make sure OpenClaw records everything that it does and review those logs periodically, especially in the early weeks. Maybe even create an objective for OpenClaw where it's reviewing that and telling you back and summarizing it if reviewing the individual logs is a little too crazy. But if OpenClaw starts doing something unexpected, you want to know before it becomes a problem, and logging is the best way to do that.
So the really high level jargon free summary, and again, please go and do research. This is just a
Mhm.
very high level, quick recap of how to operate this safely, but keep it in an isolated environment, a hardened Docker if you can, localhost only, so do not connect it to the internet, write
Mhm.
guardrails into the sold markdown file, minimal access, build your trust slowly, vet all of the skills from the marketplace,
Mhm.
obviously keep humans in the loop for anything consequential, and keep an eye on what it's been doing. Like, that is a lot. It's a lot of
Yeah.
information.
Yeah, and the honest bottom line, if the technical aspects of this feel beyond where you are right now, that is completely valid place to be. So instead, tools like Claude Cowork are maturing quickly and have commercial grade security behind them. So you might want to err on the side of those tools. It is entirely reasonable to wait for OpenClaw to mature further or for a more managed version to emerge from maybe it's the OpenAI side of the story or some other tool to pop up.
Yeah. I think within, I don't know, the next year, we'll be talking about this very differently. But right now, if you're going to experiment, please, please, please do it safely. I know that this is the really trendy thing that a lot of people are doing and everyone likes to jump on the trends, but this is one that you need to be so, so careful about. If
Yeah.
you can't do it safely, don't touch this with a 10-foot barge pole. Go play around with Cowork. Okay, so let's just talk about takeaways for this really quickly. I think we've thrown a lot of very technical information at you, but let's do a framework because we love a framework on this show. We'll call it SAVE. 4 rules for using OpenClaw.
First one, S, stands for sandbox first. So do not use this on your own machine, not with full access. Isolate it potentially on a Docker container. Give it limited scope. Think of it as like the sandbox you build for a new employee. It's useful, it's accessible, but it's not connected to everything and has guardrails.
A is for access minimum. So start read only, which means that it can only read things. It can't write or it can't perform an action. So something like a calendar summary or the weather, it's nothing that writes or sends or deletes or executes until you have watched it operate and you trust it a little bit more.
Vet every skill before you install it. Treat each one like software because it is software. So check the developer, check the community. Use the Gen Agent Trust Hub scanner, which is a tool that is very useful for the marketplace.
And finally, enable human approval for anything consequential. So sending emails, deleting files, running commands. That confirmation step is a real safety net, and it will cost you 3 seconds. So definitely
Mhm.
make sure you turn it on.
And the bonus takeaway is effectively just treat OpenClaw like an employee.
Yeah.
So all of the habits that you've built around passwords and security, you should apply those to OpenClaw just like it was an employee itself.
I would say for any AI agent, so that includes Cowork as well. Don't just limit
Yeah.
yourself to OpenClaw on that one as well. Yeah. Okay. So that is OpenClaw. Kyle, what's your final thoughts on this? Because I know that you've got final thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think I go back and forth. I am going to keep it. I'm going to put it on the iMac mini with the Docker container and all the security. I'm going to try to do some really basic things with it. And I'm just going to follow our own framework. I can see how, like, doing some of the administrative work around meetings, emails, and providing summaries could be really great. However, I'm probably going to err more on the Claude Cowork side than this just yet.
Yeah, I'm probably not going to touch this for the near future. I'm going to
Me too.
stick with Cowork, I think, for now, if I'm going to delve into this at all, because I just want that security, that built-in security that Anthropic already has.
Yeah, if in a week's time I come back and say, "Oh my gosh, I have my own AI gone wrong story."
Great. Well,
Hopefully not.
I look forward to that for next week. Okay, so moving on to AI news of the week, and this one lands really nicely in the context of everything that we've just been talking about because it's essentially the industry responding to the exact problems that we've been discussing.
So, hot on the heels of OpenClaw, Perplexity just launched something called Perplexity Computer, and the subtext of the whole announcement is basically, here's agentic AI but done properly.
The pitch from Perplexity is that computer is a general purpose digital worker, which is their words, that can reason, delegate, search, build, remember, code, and deliver. So you describe an outcome, it breaks it into tasks and subtasks. This is interesting and quite different. It spins up sub-agents to handle each piece and then coordinates the whole thing automatically. It can run in the background for hours or apparently even months, which is wild, checking in only when it actually needs you.
So on the surface, it does sound a lot like OpenClaw. The key difference is where it lives. So OpenClaw runs locally, and we've talked all about that. Perplexity Computer runs entirely in the cloud in a controlled environment. So that means it can't touch your local files at all, which eliminates some of that category of risk. The trade-off is that it's inherently more limited than something directly on your hardware.
I mean, that's exactly the thing that makes OpenClaw so dangerous for non-technical users is that local access is what is really powerful, but you have to build the security boundaries yourself. Perplexity is saying, we handle that. Never gets near your machine in the first place. Don't worry about that side of the security stuff.
The other great thing is this is also multimodal. So just like OpenClaw, you can interchange the different AIs. I think Claude Opus 4.6, which is their latest LM, is the core reasoning engine. Gemini for deep research. Other models handle like images and videos. So it's kind of bringing all of it together and using, kind of like what we talked about last week, using the best model for the task.
Which is very interesting that Perplexity is leaning on the other models to do this for them. It's a bit like having a CEO who knows which specialist to call rather than trying to do everything themselves. And obviously, from a business owner perspective, the idea of getting that best of every model without having to think about which one to use is very appealing.
So I'll just compare this. Cowork sits in a very similar space to Perplexity Computer. Both are managed, cloud-based, and have companies standing behind the security. So unlike OpenClaw, you're not configuring anything on your own machine. The difference between Cowork and Perplexity Computer, Cowork is focused on your Claude workflow, so calendar, email, files. Perplexity Computer is going after something a little bit more ambitious, which is multi-model orchestration, long-running tasks, sometimes a month, and then spinning up those sub-agents to work in parallel to complete an objective.
I think the way that I would frame it is that Cowork is the most accessible on-ramp. It's one of the reasons why I think it's very appealing for me. You can use it today. It's got really minimal setup. There's real commercial trust behind it. Perplexity Computer is the more powerful vision of where this cloud-based agentic AI is heading. So
Mhm.
it's currently at $200 a month for Perplexity Max subscribers, which is a very heavy fee.
Mhm.
So it's perhaps prohibitively expensive, and it is a little bit different than Cowork. OpenClaw is the DIY version of all of this, so it's more capable than either, kind of in theory, but again, as we've
Mhm.
endlessly discussed in this episode, you are entirely responsible for your own security. So there's
Mhm.
obviously things that you need to be conscious of with that.
So we may end up covering Perplexity Computer in future states, but
I think
just
maybe we should actually, once
yeah.
it's settled in a couple of weeks, we should look at it now that we've looked at Cowork and OpenClaw.
But ultimately, there's three tools, three very different points on the same spectrum. And what's important is this didn't exist 6 months ago. So things are moving very quickly, and we are starting to see us moving up our, autonomy ladder.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, let's move on to AI gone wrong. And this week we're going somewhere a little bit different because we've talked a lot about OpenClaw and autonomous agents and things going horribly wrong. Let's look at a much more common, much more everyday AI failure where the stakes aren't quite as high as someone's email being deleted. Not every AI disaster involves a database getting breached or someone's entire inbox getting deleted. Sometimes it's just a supermarket chatbot telling a customer about its mother.
Yes. So Woolworths, the biggest supermarket chain in Australia, has an AI assistant called Olive. And recently, customers started complaining that Olive was behaving in a way that can only be described as deeply unsettling. I feel like we've heard this before.
I feel like we have, yeah. Although the reason behind this one is quite interesting.
Yeah. So one customer called in to rearrange a delivery, gave Olive their date of birth, and Olive started rambling about how its mother was born in the same year. You love that.
It's so stupid.
Another user on X said Olive started talking about its memories of its mother and her angry voice. Yeah. Well, so Jess, why don't you tell us what actually happened?
Okay, so what actually happened, because this is interesting from a technical standpoint, it actually wasn't the AI going rogue, which I feel like this is the first time we've covered it where it hasn't been the AI going rogue. It was the opposite. Woolworths admitted that the responses about birthdays and mothers were pre-written scripts created by a human several years ago, which were designed to give Olive a warmer, more personal feel. So when users entered something that looked like a date of birth, the system matched it to an old decision tree and triggered one of these fun facts. So that's actually, I know, it's hilarious. So it's actually legacy code that no one thought to remove when Olive got an AI upgrade.
So we're going to coin a new term today. It is not a hallucination problem. It is a Frankenstein problem.
Yep.
So you've got a modern large language model sitting on top of years old scripting, maybe that was built pre OpenAI, ChatGPT
Definitely,
3.0,
yeah.
and it was just never cleaned up. And so it has these instructions way in the background, and the two together are producing outputs that nobody anticipated, and probably this developer is long gone and everyone forgot about, right?
Well, this is what we always say about data hygiene, right? Making sure your data is ready for
100%.
LLMs. This is the perfect example. And there was actually a separate issue as well, which was pricing errors, because LLMs generate responses based on learned patterns, not real-time data. So Olive
Mm,
was quoting incorrect prices for basic grocery items unless it was explicitly connected to a live database, which apparently it wasn't always connected. So that meant that it was giving
mm.
incorrect or outdated pricing information.
Yeah, I mean, that's a real design
Yeah,
issue.
that's a real issue. Yeah.
Because for a supermarket serving customers who, are making decisions about household
Yeah.
budgets and how much, I mean, grocery prices, right? I mean, that's a whole conversation.
Woolworths has now removed the scripting, and to their credit, they responded quickly once this went public. So it's just a good example of why sometimes you still have to consider these legacy systems when you are implementing AI.
Absolutely.
And at least this one is a fairly harmless gone wrong story.
Yeah.
Okay. So that is a wrap on what I think is probably one of the most important episodes we've done, not just because OpenClaw is one of the biggest AI stories of the year, but because I think it's all
Mm,
about what it represents. We are entering an era of AI that doesn't just advise, it acts. And so the
mhm,
security and trust questions that come with this are incredibly important. And it's something that all of our listeners need to be aware of.
mhm. Yeah, and I hope you don't walk away from this episode thinking, "Oh my gosh, this is too scary. I never want to touch it." AI is going to take over the world. That's not what we're here to do. We're really here about How can you set this up and be careful about what you do? And then you can get all of the benefits around it. So if you have been experimenting with OpenClaw already, we'd love to hear about it. We'd love to hear about your setups. Maybe there's some things we missed that would really help this audience and our own community. Maybe what went wrong, what went right. We'd love to hear all about those. Please reach out.
You can find us at hello@earlyadopter.ai. Remember, there is no E in adopter. We are on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube at early_adopter. LinkedIn as well. I can't remember if I mentioned that.
Yeah, so subscribe if you haven't already. Leave a review if you found this one valuable. It generally helps us reach more people who'd find this useful. And I know it's super late in the episode, but I am going to call out thank you to Audit and Jazz who have left great reviews. I really appreciate that from my friends.
There we go. Thanks, friends. Right. We will see you next week. Bye.
Bye, Jess.